exactly right.
Cool.
Minute five.
That's all right. I'll have that. I'll have that going as well.
That stays on.
Yeah, hopefully so.
Good afternoon. Hello and welcome to today's Lunch Hour Lecture. Very pleased to introduce Dr. Nick Piercey from the UCL Dutch Department with his lecture, I've forgotten the title. Yeah. Paying the Penalty, the Sporting Prison. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, John. Right. You haven't heard the speech yet, so wait for afterwards for the clapping. My name's Nick Piercey, as John said, from the UCL Dutch Department. Really warm welcome for those of you who've come from outside UCL, and for those of you watching online. I'm waving at a camera that I don't know where it is. I really value you giving up your lunch hour to listen to me today. And as John said, my lecture today is entitled Paying the Penalty, the Sporting Prison. And my main research interests are in Dutch football history, particularly the first 2 decades of the 20th century. And I particularly like using this period to do experimental history, to ask questions about history and sport and the world around us today, what it means to us today. And to get a gratuitous plug out of the way, in addition to all of the leaflets that you can see around you, hopefully those online will be able to see the web address. I've just published my first book, or rather UCL Press has published my first book. And it's a free open access download online. So that's going to stay up there for a few minutes while you all take it in. Now, within the book are a number of proposals. Proposals on how sport, society, history, and historians link together. And today I'm going to present a proposal about how sport developed in the Netherlands in the early 20th century. How it can be viewed as part of a subtle, yet pervasive and strong attempt to construct society in a certain way, with a certain set of values. How it could reproduce ideas about the world around it, and perhaps how sport does that today. Now, I've called my history a proposal deliberately, and before I start and explain what that proposal is, I need to probably say why I'm doing this. I use the term proposal because I believe it is impossible for history to reconstruct, reflect, or recreate the past. The past is gone. It's not coming back. We're only left with some fragments of the past from which we can make up our stories. And my skepticism on the ability of history to recreate the past is broadly linked to postmodern ideas. It's a word that's perhaps slightly unfashionable now, but I'm going to try and bring it back again. These ideas question the idea of certainty in history, on whether history can give us any definitive account of the past, and particularly on how the narrative that historians construct is constructed. Now, this view of mine has clear implications for what I believe the purpose of history is today and for what I try to do. In my view, history is about the present and the future. The past is perhaps the least important aspect. History should be about the stories we tell, why we tell them, and the kind of ideas we have about the world we want to construct around us. And the past offers us a very powerful place to test out our ideas. The Dutch historical philosopher Frank Angerschmidt says that history can be an experimental garden. By this he means that history can be a place where we test out our political and moral ideas before they're actually put in place in society. History then can be of use to both the present and the future, and crucially, we can all be historians. Now, such experiments are deeply personal in nature. They're imbued with values and opinions. But through this, they derive their immediacy and relevance. And I think that academic work has to be relevant. There's no point just doing things because they're fun. We need to get some kind of relevance out of them. Now, this dashing youngster here, I'm told is me. Seems a very long time ago. But that there is me playing rugby around the age of 10. And I remember with enthusiasm, Sundays playing for Maidenhead Rugby Club against, I assume that's a speck of dirt on the lens, and that kid doesn't have a moustache at the age of 9. Just noticed that, that's a bit odd. But I was enthusiastic about playing matches on Sunday. On Saturdays I played for my school, likewise on Wednesday. Training was slightly less fun, particularly in the long winter months, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Every day I cycled to school. Mornings and afternoons became some kind of competition for me to beat my record, to go a slightly different way. Lunchtimes meant running around in a uniform, kicking a tennis ball against a makeshift goal, or into a makeshift goal if I'm trying to big myself up. It's fair to say that I love sport. It might also be fair to say that I didn't know any better. In any event, I remember my childhood being one of sport and schoolwork. And as I stand here today, I wonder how much has actually changed. But as I've grown older, I've started to question my relationship with sport, how it operates in the world around me. Apart from the increasingly frequent and persistent injuries which I started to acquire, including one yesterday from playing squash against myself, which I still don't quite understand how that happened, I started to worry that I'd become too reliant on sport for a sense of self-worth, that it gained an enormous power over me. And my anarchic tendencies started to worry about how sport was interacting in the world around me, how it was linked to power, how large organisations were so influential in the world of sport, and also how it helped us tell stories about the world around us. Now, as someone who is prone to, at best, what I like to think of as a healthy scepticism, what my friends call outright depression and outright cynicism, I saw with increasing alarm how sport was mired in scandals, in controversy. Drug programs, financial abuses, personal abuses of young and old, small organisations like clubs, large organisations, FIFA, the IOC, or the IAAF, to mention just three, which often get quite a negative reaction as soon as you say their name. But was it just organisations, or was it something that by playing sport, I was also helping to promote, these problems of power? The picture behind me is a rather cheery one of Michel Foucault, which I particularly like. Having finished my PhD studies in Dutch football, and in one of my more sceptical/cynical moods, I came across a book by this man, who many of you may have come across. And the book was called Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. And this outlines the development of how prisons emerged in modern France. And I'll come back to an idea of his in a moment. But much of what I read provoked thoughts about how I related to sport. It made me question whether the habits I developed over 33 years were beneficial to me. It made me question whether the thing I actually love is something that I like anymore. So with Foucauldian tainted eyes, I returned to my research. I returned to Dutch football with new questions, just as thousands of academics have done before after reading Foucault. And I wanted to experiment with these. I wanted to come up with a new proposal on how sport developed in the early 20th century in the Netherlands. But this is a history of the present, and today I'd like to invite you to think about how your relationship with sport works, and maybe think about my proposal in your own context. So what is this proposal I've been going on about for 7 minutes and not mentioning? Well, my proposal is that sport is of fundamental importance in constructing and reproducing discipline, order, and authority. And it was so in the early 20th century in the Netherlands. That at this time, it helped construct docile, ordered, and regulated citizens. Citizens who were effective for a society that was geared towards work. Football, I would suggest, was not a liberation from work, from school, or even from the prison, but it was merely an extension of those ideas which permeated through these institutions. Sport was itself a prison, hence the title of my lecture. So where did sport fit into Dutch cultural life? Here is a wonderful image of the proto Dutch national team in 1895, proto because at this point they weren't an official national team, but this was considered the best group of young players in the Netherlands. Now, the development of sporting clubs in the Netherlands was part of a wider process of cultural organisational development in the 18th century. Between 1870 and 1900, lots of new societies emerged in different fields of art and culture. Musical societies, poor help societies, artistic societies, and sporting societies were just one part of this. And many of these societies were explicitly intended to spread a discourse of values through society. They had their own message about how the world should be constructed. The historian De Vries notes they were part of a civilizing offensive. And as I said, sporting clubs were no different to these cultural organisations. They were locations where certain ideas, certain concepts, certain views about the world were spread, reproduced, and constructed. Now, initially, football clubs weren't like this. They were rather disorganised groups of individuals. Often they were formed by young men, very young men of the age of 12 or 13, who came from what Dutch historian Meersman describes as the better milieus, so often quite wealthy, particularly in the west of the Netherlands, around Amsterdam, Haarlem, The Hague, and Rotterdam. And in the 1880s, networks of these young men started to worry about how the game was being played. They found it increasingly difficult to organise matches. They found it difficult to find pitches. Often, teams had different numbers of players. They didn't know where to meet, when to meet, or what rules were going to be played to. And this changed, or started to change, with the establishment of the Dutch Football Association in 1889. From this time, football slowly became more regulated and more ordered. At the same time, physical activity in wider society became more accepted, more widespread, particularly gymnastics in schools, and organisations were set up to spread the idea of gymnastics or just healthy recreational walking about. Football was in a slightly different position. It was often treated initially sceptically by those in positions of authority, political authority, religious authority, and medical authority. It was seen as something that was perhaps detrimental to the young. The Dutch FA set about trying to change this image of the game. They demonstrated it was a positive tool for educating the most vulnerable, the most needy in society as it was seen at the time, the poor and the young. And in doing this, the Dutch FA started to normalise the game of football in society. They made it something that wasn't such an odd thing to do. It was something that could be part of everyday life. But it also positioned the game by doing this as part of the wider civilising offensive, something that could impart a correct set of values to the new generation. And the crossover between politics, business and sport is clearly demonstrable from this early point. Many of the people who invested in clubs, in football stadia, were from rather wealthy backgrounds. They controlled trade, politics, business in the Netherlands. They also invested in other philanthropic organisations. Football was no different to any other cultural society in this sense. And these organisations promoted a specific discourse of values, a specific way of viewing how the world should be and how it should be constructed. And these values were largely, though not exclusively, those of entrepreneurship, self-sacrifice, of the nation, of male superiority, of the correct behaviour, of respect for authority, and crucially of the predominance of work. As with other cultural acts, football developed into a location where the implementation of these values was fiercely contested. It was one where authority became intimately linked to discourses of values, how the world should be constructed. It became part of a disciplinary mechanism which constructed docile, obedient, and useful bodies in society. He's back again. In many ways. Now, discipline is a term outlined by Michel Foucault in the book Discipline and Punish that I mentioned earlier. And one of the main thrusts of his argument is that after the 18th century, the implementation of authority and power began to focus on the body in increasingly minute and microscopic ways. Rather than punishing an individual misdeeds with force, with torture, or that kind of punishment, it started to focus within the body, on gestures, on movements, on how people acted. Foucault suggests that within the disciplinary structure, individuals started to internalise rules. Crucially, they started to police their own behaviour. And by doing so, they became more docile, more useful. They saw these ideals, these normalised ideals, and they compared themselves to them, and they started to change their behaviour from within. So daily life became permeated by a series of regulations, of organisations, and permitted practices. And these were crucially not governed by law, but they were governed by everybody. They were governed by what he called infra-penalties. They were designed to change action, not physical, corporal entities, i.e. they didn't use force. And this disciplinary mechanism operated in many different institutions, in schools, in factories, and in the prison, he said. It created a more insidious and microscopic form of control within the body of individuals. And Foucault suggests that this disciplinary discourse was linked to the spread of a form of capitalism. He says it's intimately linked to modern capitalism in society. It helps cement the ideas of capitalism within the body itself. Now, his disciplinary concept, Foucault's disciplinary concept, is nuanced. It's very complex. I certainly can't do justice to it in a minute, or possibly in a book. But my proposal is that in many respects, through increased normalisation and popularisation, football in the Netherlands began to play a vital part in this disciplinary mechanism. It was all the more powerful because of the intimate link between sport and the body. So just how was football part of this disciplinary mechanism in the Dutch case? Behind me you can see a fixture list on the right, and on the left, down here, a group of rather fine gentlemen in a committee meeting to decide punishments for individuals. Breathed a bit heavy there. After the establishment of the Dutch FA, a network of regional, local and civic organisations were created to ensure that the game of football in the Netherlands ran properly, as they saw it. They ensured that rules were followed, like these guys here. They ensured that updates were made to the rules and passed on to each of the participants. They handed down forms of punishment for errors, whatever they were, either on the pitch or off the pitch. And in many ways, administration became just as important part of sport as playing the game did itself. And not only did sporting organisations regulate how long matches would be, they regulated when things could happen. The Dutch FA was responsible for creating fixture lists like this, which meant that every week people knew where they were supposed to be and what they were supposed to be doing at which specific time. Football developed a temporal rhythm. Training in the week, matches on Sunday, media reports on a Monday. Training in the week, matches on Sunday, media reports on a Monday. I won't do it again, but you kind of get where I'm going. And not only weekly, but through seasons too. Time became constructed and given a set of values and ideas. Football reinforced the concept of the timetable, something so important to the Foucauldian concept of discipline. It reinforced the idea of when certain things could be done and, crucially, when certain things could not be done. It reinforced a pattern of everyday life. Now, just as football reinforced how time could be used, it also started to code how space could be used. In the early part of the 20th century, sporting stadia like this one, which was built first in 1914 in Amsterdam. This is a picture of the, I believe, France-Netherlands game in 1923. They started to become more numerous. And stadia like this started to shape how people behaved. It wasn't only a symbolic representation of a civic pride, of showing that Amsterdam was at the forefront of technology of the football world, but it became a very practical way of shaping how people used the space of the city. The stadium itself was described as sober, civilised, of a fitting character, keeping to the plans laid out and also the budget. And yes, this was a great description of this wonderful stadium, but it was also a blueprint for how individuals should interact with the space, soberly, in a civilised manner, keeping to budgets, making sure they acted properly. And with the construction of these new functional stadia, a whole new technique of how space could be used emerged. This diagram of the same stadium on its opening day in 1914 shows how space was segmented into different areas. Different areas were giving different meanings and different ideas. As Dutch newspaper De Courant stated on the opening, that police were barely needed to police the 20,000 people. Why? Because they already knew how to behave. They had internalized rules in the city, and they'd internalized the rules of the stadium. The space of the stadium helped people to act in a certain way, and to act with the idea that space was segmented and had its own set of norms and standards. This is my favourite photo. It's a photo of a match between Sparta Rotterdam and Ajax in 1912. You might not be able to see, but it seems like that man's just kicking someone up the back while at least 3 Ajax players stand around with hands on hips, which is a bit weird. But if the stadium helped link values to the citizen, to the public, then training instilled the need for certain values within the player, within the body of the footballer. The body became used to responding to a whistle rather than physical force. Just think about that for a moment. A mere whistle stops action, stops what people are doing. Why? Because they're trained to respond to that. Power becomes inscribed within the body, and increasingly physical power becomes less important than these powerful gestures like the whistle or a clap or a comb. Methods of training and exercise developed from this. They developed their own science and technology. It was aimed at getting the most efficient use of the body for the sporting task, something which perhaps some of these individuals needed to pay more attention to. But crucially, this was linked to punishment. In football, the individual has to know the codes of the game. If you handle the ball when you're not supposed to, that's a free kick. If you do it in a different part of the pitch, that's a penalty. You have to know what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do, and this is then internalized. Through sport, who, how, and where you could act in certain ways became coded within the very body of the individual. And newspapers helped in this. They frequently discussed rules, regulations, what people could do, where people were breaking these ideas. And by rules and regulations, I mean, in a way, unwritten rules, not laws, but again, those infra-penalties, how you should behave, how you should act. Clubs and players were punished for contravention of the rules, and so too were fans. In the east of the Netherlands in 1910, one Dutch newspaper questioned why it was that young people had been banned from watching football matches. Matches had been banned because of trouble. And the newspaper said these young people need to question whether they value watching football or not. If they do, they need to change their behaviour. And football is a key part of making people act in a correct way. And with this development of football came a whole new series of data that could be collected. This is a membership list from Rotterdam Sparta in 1914. You can see it has the names of the players, has their addresses, has their location. And there are many different forms of information collected on this sheet. But in addition to membership lists, a whole plethora of data were collected. Medical records, addresses, backgrounds, financial circumstances. Dutch FA collected lists like this for every single club in the country that was affiliated to it. So every individual who was a member of these clubs had all their data recorded. More than this, for young Dutch boys, medical practitioners recommended that they undertake a medical before being allowed to play football. And thus football both reproduced and constructed the need for collecting data. It created its own system of knowledge. And this knowledge was to be built upon, to be used to construct new ideas and to ensure that people could be observed. The sporting individual was increasingly recorded and examined, both inside and out. And with this knowledge, with this new data, came the ability to rank, one of the most important parts of the Foucauldian idea. This, to me, well, I'll say what it is first. This is a table from 1919, I believe, and it shows Ajax doing pretty well at the top. Quick from The Hague doing less well. And to me, nothing so perfectly encapsulates Foucault's idea of discipline than the Football League table. Why is this? Well, at a single glance, this table renders whole months of action into a very simply understood way of measuring success and failure. You've probably already worked out, without me saying, that Ajax are doing pretty well. They're at the top, that's pretty good. At the bottom, Quick are doing less well. So this tangibly showed how behaviour, how action, how qualities were being measured. And it did so in a very easily understandable and easily reproducible form. In newspapers, tables started to be printed more often. I was going to say oftenly, but that's not a word. They were printed more often. And it was clear who had succeeded and who had failed. As interest in football grew in the media, the visibility of tables started to grow into other journals more regularly. And we can probably think today how our life today is permeated by lists, rankings everywhere. Why is this? What is it actually doing? Is it telling us whether things are better, or is it doing something slightly more sinister? This wonderful picture of this brilliantly mustachioed man is of Bok de Korver wearing the national jersey in around 1914. And with the development of media interest, often fueled by those in positions of power in the Dutch FA, a whole new discourse emerged surrounding Dutch football, a discourse of what was acceptable to do and what wasn't. Men like this became seen as true amateurs. Amateurs became this powerful word. And by amateur, they didn't only mean that he played without receiving money, but it was intimately linked to demonstrating correct values, those values I talked about before, the values of hard work, of sacrifice for the team, of the nation, of male superiority. It was about knowing the fine line between being too strong and not strong enough. And that word started to encapsulate all these ideals, and his picture started to be seen as something to be lived up to. He was a norm. He was something that people could compare themselves against, and crucially, they could work harder themselves to be more like him. In the late 1910s, people went from being just football players to stars. By 1918, he was described as the first star of Dutch football. He was raised again to a higher plateau. So football spread concepts of the individual, but it also spread concepts of how people could be ranked, differentiated, measured, and crucially, how each individual could perform more like certain people. They could be judged and reformed. They could be compared to these ideals. And all of these aspects that I've just talked about, again, this is the picture of the match from 1923. All of these aspects of discipline culminated in the match day experience, as horribly modern discourse would call it, or as we like to call it, a football match. This could be seen as an exam for what people had learned in committees, in training, in stadia. As football became more popular, the match became a centre of surveillance, where fans, referees, players, administrators, and whole groups of people watched each other to make sure that they kept to these unwritten rules. They were kept in check, they were kept in order. Newspaper reports focused on the behaviour of players, of fans, on the performance of referees, of everyone concerned. For example, in 1910, de Courant spoke with positive terms about an administrator who, despite poor weather, had made sure that matches went ahead in 1910. He had made sure that he passed his exam, just as those fans who behaved inappropriately in the same year had failed theirs. And instead of school exams, which happened after several months, this match happened every week. It reinforced every week these discourses of how people should behave, of normality, of what was acceptable. In this way, the newly built mass stadia became the best tool of surveillance in modern society. They were a way to segregate, to order, to construct people, to instruct and to reform them. Now to finish. Early Dutch football was something which was intrinsically linked to the reproduction of power in wider society, to tell people how they could use their body, where they could do it, when they could do it. Football constructed an environment where discipline, order, and authority became ingrained within the body of the individual on the most minute scale. And it was one where the individual could be examined on a regular basis. They could check whether they were living up to the right ideas. Sport was not a separate part of culture. It was not merely a reflection of wider cultural or social developments, but it was something that helped construct society around it. Certain discourses of values were constructed through football. It enabled certain views of the world to be embedded within the body of the individual. It made constructed and fluid sets of values appear normal, appear reality, appear permanent. Football was not an escape from the factory, nor was it an escape from school. It was merely an extension of those particular things. It was a subtle, pervasive, and powerful way of extending the discourses of power into every part of modern life. It did not encourage freedom, but it merely curtailed it. Having said this, I don't want to paint this as an entirely bleak picture, he says after 20 minutes of being very bleak. Individuals are not merely rendered helpless by authority. Change is not impossible. Rather, my proposal aims to demonstrate how certain everyday acts were linked to constructed values, which were linked to power. They were linked to certain times and places. The world around us and the way it operates is a construct. It's reproduced on a daily level, but that means that things can change, and we have the power to change them, even if it's in small ways. Those small ways are very important, but we also have the power to keep reproducing them if we don't question them. This history is intimately connected to the present. It's a personal approach to the past. It's built from a concern about how sport operates in the world around me and within me as well. Sport today is still filled with timetables, organisations, regulations, values, spatial constraints, and constraints over who can do where and what, when. It is deeply connected to power, to identity, to authority. I remain concerned at whether it has a positive influence on me, on you, on the wider society. These concerns motivated me to construct this partial, subjective, historical proposal. It's an attempt to ask questions about the world around me. And I want this proposal to be questioned, to be challenged, to be criticised, not because I think I've misled you, not because I think it's wrong, but because I still don't have answers to the questions which provoked this particular historical proposal. Helping propose tentative answers to confusing and challenging questions must be the basis of historical research, particularly in a history, in a field of study in an open and democratic society. Now, I hope that I provoked you to think about how you relate to sport. And maybe you'll have your own ideas about your own historical proposals. Hopefully you can help me find answers, particularly to the most challenging question, which I still don't have an answer to, which is, after all I've said about football and sport being so negative, why is it I still can't wait to get out and play? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Nick. It's time for questions, and we're joined by people who are watching us online. The event code for Slido is is it on the screen? 8554. Yeah. And Twitter watchers can join us too. So it's open now for questions. Yes, there's one from.
So this is a question from Slido, 8554. Talking about history flowing to today, the phrase sober and civilised behaviour of the early football matches, has that continued today? What correct values have flowed into modern Dutch society?
Thank you. That's actually an excellent question. Thinking about all society, really, I think the phrase has continued to exist, but its meaning has shifted. People are still supposed to behave in a sober and civilised way. You're not supposed to behave, well, I say you're not supposed to behave like a lunatic. Often football seems like you are. But those are a specific set of values. And there are limits to that. When we see people behaving in aggressive or overly violent ways at football matches, that's criticised. It may be a different set of values, but the idea of football being sober and civilised and people behaving in certain ways has continued to today. In Dutch society, particularly with the Feyenoord and Ajax conflict, I say conflict, rivalry would be a better word. Those debates about why people do certain things, whether it's acceptable or not, continue, very much so. They're really an important part of football's discourse in the Netherlands, which is why away fans are banned from Ajax and Feyenoord games against each other, which I think is an odd indictment of how they can't solve that problem. Yes, that discourse of values is still very much important, although its meaning has shifted, and I'd say the same is true for Britain as well.
Thanks. Thank you. You carried me along with what you were saying about the role of the clubs in disciplining, even right down to small aspects of the body and training and responding to whistles and things like that. But my next question was, and it seemed like football therefore had this national role to play in embedding certain values or promulgating them or spreading them. But of course it would be much more powerful if it was done everywhere to all little boys. So I just wondered if you knew at what stage football came in schools.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the promotion of football within schools was one of the key things that the Dutch FA wanted to do right from the start. So from around 1908, you're getting discussions with organisations of school teachers to show that football could be useful. And then around 1911, it starts becoming more acceptable. And that's where these medical discussions start saying, well, we need to get people checked before they're allowed to play. After that point, particularly around World War I, where football was particularly seen as something which could become a mass popular thing, after that point, football becomes more practiced in schools. And this, I think, is a key part. The fact it was, practiced on everyday level by an increasing number of people throughout the country meant that these discourses started to reach a wider group of people. And that involvement in schools from 1914 and onwards was of a key part of the spread of these sets of values. And it was the key thing that the Dutch FA wanted to promote from 1908 onwards. Hopefully that answers the question.
You touched a bit on change. Were there any instances of resistance and rebellion which then fed back into the system and actually changed the system?
Thanks, that's a very good question. One of the things I would say to that is my history, like all others, is incomplete. It's got errors. It's got things that which I look back on now and think I should change. That question is a key question. What are the areas of resistance? Could it be resistance that someone commits a foul? Or is that merely a continuation? That's a very difficult question to work out from historical sources because that's something that's very individual, which perhaps isn't documented. It's something I need to do more work on because I think I was overly influenced, perhaps overzealously, by Foucault's idea, this very sort of broad, brusque approach to the idea of discipline. And there are bound to be areas of resistance. How that resistance was changed and how it was received by authority is something important. One could, and I'll be careful about the way I phrase this, see hooliganism as a form of resistance to authority. I'm not saying that I do. I'm not saying that it's good. I'm saying that one could perhaps investigate whether it is that or not. I hope I've couched that answer very carefully. But yes, it's something I need to look more into.
Can I ask a question on this? You referred to the little boys and you showed us little boys. And when we move to adults, we're looking at men. What about the gender issue here? What, from your, I mean, you're talking about sport in general, and from your work, is there any evidence that the influence is going to be across the board in women's sports and things like that?
I focus on men mainly for two reasons. One, that was an error of my initial research, and two, that women were not allowed to play football. From 1895, there was a Sparta women's team who were supposed to play a game against an English touring side, I think from Felixstowe. And the FA just went, no, you're not doing that. And then right up until the 30s, the war as well, there were constant discussions over whether women should be allowed to play football, but the answer was always no. And those were for the usual criticisms of health, of women not being suitable to do that. So there were discussions, but largely women didn't participate in football. There were a few, but it was banned officially. And also unofficially, it was very much part of the discourse that sport was for men. And that's one of the problems I have with it. So I think a question worth considering is whether inviting more women to play sport is a good thing, or whether we need to think of different ways to play and to enjoy our leisure time, which perhaps don't pass down these values further.
Presumably there were women's sports, and so if
Yes.
they want to influence society,
Yeah.
why aren't they influencing both sides of
What you said there was very important, that there were women's sports, sports like Colvin, which was allowed for women to play, but they weren't seen as overly rough. Cycling was kind of okay, and I would suggest I would need to do more research on this, but those sports too were promoting a certain discourse of values. It would have been slightly different, it wouldn't have been the masculinist version, but they would be promoting their own discourse of values about how women should behave in society. And there was no crossover.
Is there another one from? Oh, yeah, there you go. That's it. Yes. Yeah, that's the lessons there, sure. Was there another one from? Yes. Another front here. Yeah, that's it. No. You because not everybody. The recording doesn't hear you.
Okay, yeah. Well, this is a bit of an oblique question, and it relates to cricket. You're talking about discipline.
Yeah.
I just wonder how widespread was the game of cricket in the Netherlands, and if it was influential, to what extent did that have an effect on the society?
Excellent. That's a wonderful question which could tee me up to my future research problem. I'd like to look at Dutch cricket in the Netherlands. Interesting, a lot of people you see on this team behind me will have also played cricket. Initially, cricket and football were seen as the games of the upper class in the Netherlands. It was widespread. Basically, cricket was the summer football. So they stopped the game in May so people could play cricket. People went on tour of England. English teams went on tour of Netherlands up until from the 1880s. So cricket was popular with particularly these guys here. After football became more popular with a wider part of the Dutch society, around 1918 and onwards, when what we might call working class people started playing it, these guys didn't seem to like it that much, and they retreated from football and started playing games like cricket and hockey. So cricket, hockey and rugby had a slightly more niche interest in the Netherlands, but they were there. They were there from the start, and they were very important in spreading values, because at this time, they would be the same values, because they were the same people playing it. So it was important. That's something I hope to look into in future, the history of Dutch cricket, because I think it's something that needs to be looked at more thoroughly.
These guys are wearing very early forms of shin pads,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
apparently was developed by, if I remember correctly, the guy who invented shin pads was a football player.
That doesn't surprise me.
No, it's cricket. Let's work this one up.
But yeah, as you can see, sort of a whole range of different ages, different equipment, some wearing shin pads, others
The shin
wearing
pads
hats.
developed from cricket.
Yeah.
To football.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me, but there was a crossover, and looking at also the role of entrepreneurial sports equipment is another thing that I've got to do for another research project somewhere. But yeah, these questions of kit development are also interesting as well in the discourse.
Now we're warming up and we're running out of time.
Oh.
There's two questions here. Can you take the two questions together and then
I can
see
give it a go.
if you can answer them?
Probably as well as I can answer one.
So just listen to them
Thank
both
you.
first.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, so, you know, these days we've got a lot of sponsorship from alcohol companies and gambling companies. So how far do you think sport could influence discipline of a healthy lifestyle for the rest of society?
Thank you.
And the other one? Can you remember these?
Hi there, I'm a psychologist working here at UCL, and we do an evaluation of a football intervention for people with mental health problems. It's called Coping Through Football. And I was wondering, like, from your background, how you see the effects of football on rulemaking. Do you think football is a great tool to provide people with structure and connectedness to other people?
Excellent, thank you. Right, to answer the first question, sponsorship, yes, I think sport does play a really important way in the discourse of health. And sponsorship's a really interesting idea because it kind of blurs those lines because it's about entrepreneurship. So you have lots of things like alcohol, like you said, used to be cigarettes, which were influencing sporting activity. But if you look at politics and the way they describe the benefits of sport, they see it as a health issue. So that's why it's promoted. I would say that's perhaps a red herring in a way because it promotes things as sport as a really healthy, great thing to do, while all the time these subtle things of power, of order, of control are put into that. So you think, yeah, this is great, I should be doing this. And it kind of links with your question, do I think it's something that is useful to give structure and order? Yes, I do. My question is whether you think that's a good thing or not. and I start to question it, yeah, football's great, sport's great. When I'm depressed, I do lots of activity. It really helps me feel better. But why? And what kind of things is it making my body do? Are those the things that we should be doing? It helps us be ordered, docile, really repetitive, really good at training. Helps us forget about problems. Is that something we want to do? That's a question for other people. That's the kind of relativist part of me. I think that is a problem at times, that ordered structure isn't necessarily good. It fits with the society we have, but is that the kind of society we really want?
Thank you very much. A really interesting list of issues sparked off by this, so thank you very much for your lecture. You can join with me in thanking Nick very much indeed. Very interesting.